If the Earth's been around, let's zoom it in into one day, we've existed for a few seconds. Now, humans been around for 2 million years, right? It's out of 4,543,000,000, 2 million years is nothing. Out of that time, Industrial Revolution is also another click. And if we take Industrial Revolution out of 2 million years the humans been around, this is also nothing. But we cannot imagine our life without electricity. I'm not even talking our life before smartphones, but a lot of things that are incomprehensible to us are in kind of, in bigger terms, are just a blink of an eye. So exponential technologies is not simply the invention of internet. It's inventions of I don't know, shoes or agricultural revolution. Every one of those things, they've turned the world upside down, but now it just happens so much faster. And if we are trying to imagine humanity going forward, if anybody has a guess of what the world would look like in 2200, I can guarantee with 100% certainty that whatever view you've got, it's probably 97% wrong. We just can't think this far out, right? But that's a very new experience. Hasn't been that way before. If you were a peasant in Italy, let's say, in the 5th century or in the 11th century, or if you were in the early Egyptian civilization, if you had to forecast 100 years forward, you would have gotten it right. The world wasn't changing that fast. And now it's absolutely impossible to be describing that universe going forward. So the way I wanted to start is I wanted to ask every panelist the same exact question. What's this one megatrend? What's this one technological advancement that you think is fundamental? And what is its impact? Just talk about one thing. What's its impact on humanity? So maybe we'll start with you, Margareta.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone. That's a big question, actually. I'm not sure. And let me maybe take a different take at this question. Sorry, I'm already starting on a wrong footing. I think when you think about the future, first of all, it's the characteristics of those trends that are much more important than the individual trends. So, and I think the characteristics are, that A, it's exponential. Second of all, that there is a mixing of the different technologies and a convergence of the different technologies that we cannot yet envisage. So there's a huge range of potential outcomes that we will have to live with if the more the timeline advances as well. And the third piece, which is important from a societal and also economic perspective, which we have observed in the past, is something I would call, or Salih Martin, who is a famous economist, he calls it the hummingbird effect. And let me just talk very briefly about this. It actually says that when it comes to economic opportunity and also to social opportunity, every technological innovation, every major technological innovation, such as electricity, for example, will have knock-on effects, second and third order effects, and give rise to entirely new way of living, to entirely new sectors of the economy that we cannot imagine yet. Just to give you an example, when electricity was invented, days were lengthened, so most people could do much more with the time of the day, first of all. It also made people more productive at work and at home. At home, many kitchen appliances came through. This took a very, very long time after the invention of electricity, by the way. But it freed people's time so people could travel. So it gave rise, or it has influenced quite significantly, the leisure and travel and tourism sector that we see today driving many economies around the world. So those effects very often take a very, very long period of time, and it's very difficult to imagine those trajectories up front, right? So this is something I think we should keep in mind when we talk about those technologies, because the technological trajectory and what's in the pipeline is one thing, but then the applications, how it's accepted by society, how it changes, and how all those things interact is a different trajectory.
Great, amazing. For me, this layering of technology is the key from what you described. Is if you simply have one thing that emerged, that's great. But if you have, quantum computer layered on top of genomics, and then on top of, cosmic exploration, who knows what comes of it, right? I think that's your main message. Jonathan, over to you.
Cool. Well, this is the fun panel, right? This is where we get to talk about stuff. So, I mean, obviously AI, right? I mean, it's what we deal with every day in business. We think it's 70% of all total factor productivity growth globally. It's about 2.5 times the size and speed of the Industrial Revolution in terms of the steam engine. 60% of all jobs today have 30% of their activities that could technically be replaced by an AI with no loss of performance. We think there'll be 400 million job transitions over the next 15 years because of AI. At the same time, 1.5 billion students could get adaptive learning to improve the quality of their education online because of AI. Wearables can detect diabetes with greater than 85% accuracy and could save literally hundreds of millions of lives over the next 2 decades. Cancer lesions can be detected with almost 100% accuracy now at far earlier stages. So, on the other hand, AI can trigger fake news, which will create riots and steal elections, and predictive policing algorithms can enshrine biases against minority populations for future generations. So, all of this stuff, A, it's huge impact, B, it actually works, C, it has some risks, and so we should watch that space.
I think I do cite McKinsey studies on this all the time, and I like how you called it a transition. Do we mean jobs disappear? Or maybe I'll actually do want to ask you follow up on that. And the other question is, what do you mean by AI? How do you define AI? Are we talking narrow domain? Are we talking, just give us a bit more flavor.
Sure. Well, so we have a broad definition, everything from deep structured learning to neural processing to including facial recognition as an additional technology, machine learning, and sort of essentially it's the application of data sets to computational power and a structured algorithm. So those three things: the computational power, the algorithm, and the data set combined together to create a better decision. That's what we think of as AI. So in terms of the transition, yeah, we call it like the longshoreman to the nurse transition. So this is not we're reskilling you to maybe become a better automotive technician. This job category essentially is no longer going to be growing as fast because a lot of the elements of the activities within that job category have essentially been replaced by capital or by automation. On the other hand, all that capital and that automation has yielded productivity benefits, which is going to be redeployed in income somewhere, and people are going to spend on that. And what are they going to spend on? Well, we kind of know. They're going to spend on what we call very broadly the caring economy. So it's entertainment, culture, healthcare, travel, professional services, some ICT. This is the kind of stuff people spend more money on. It just means that these job categories will decline. These job categories will grow. If you want to still have employment, you better figure out how to go from one to the other.
Excellent. I think future of work is really going to be a big pillar of this discussion, so it's very good opening. Armand, over to you. You deal with education, and if I had to guess, I think there's going to be a lot of change in that field. So can you give us a snapshot?
So firstly, it's very rare that I'm speechless, but sitting down on this panel, I'm almost speechless. I'm a firm believer that the room is always smarter than the individual, and in this situation, in the digital age, the room is exponential. The room is the world. You can go all over the place. And I think one of the most important things going forward is to make sure that we break down the silos and have discussions between sectors. And oftentimes education is the one that you end up saying education needs to change and education will be at the forefront of this and so on, but then you sort of leave the teachers alone and try to figure it out. And that's scary. And the enormity of what we're going through and the enormity of change, a lot of people have that sort of ostrich effect of putting their head in the sand and not wanting to worry about it. And this too shall pass. But I believe it's not actually technology that's going to be the most important through this exponential change of technology. My thoughts are that it's a combination of leadership, the social contract, humanity, and ethics. I believe those four are going to need to be at the forefront, and our leaders need to do better. I think our leaders across the world right now are playing on the polarization of social media to rise up to power and then to divide. And if we've learned anything from the Industrial Revolution and its impact heading towards the First World War, or when you divide society to that level, the revolution, with what we have at hand, I think it's extremely dangerous and extremely unethical for our leaders to do so. And I mean, I'm not in a situation, I'm a classroom teacher, but when you see something that's unethical, you call it out in your classroom. When you see bullying, you call it out. So, why is that not happening across the world? Why are we not keeping them up to a certain level? And that's my belief, is that if that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter how much exponential growth, not everybody's going to be able to share it.
I think you're keeping us really grounded. If we're talking about the idea of future society, I think in that topic it assumes our humanity, it assumes that we might redefine what it means to be human, but hopefully it doesn't lead to our complete demise, and staying grounded. And politics is just one manifestation from what you described, right?
It's not just politics, it's leadership across the board. Because we can doesn't necessarily mean we should. And what do I mean by that is that I truly believe in innovation. I'm a very innovative pedagogue. I try all sorts of different things to connect, and I'm definitely connecting my students to the people on this panel at one point. But you also need to not just think about what the positive effects are going to be. You got to think about what the negative effects are as well, and put into place some sort of standard or gates to be able to protect against that. I'm not going to take Facebook to task because I don't know enough to be able to do so, but from what I'm reading in the media, and basically Mark Zuckerberg saying, well, you know what, no, we're not going to actually decide what's on or what's not, and what's fake or what's not. I think that's letting go of the leadership of what you created and not taking ownership for what you created.
No, I think this is, guys, please note this topic. I think we'll come back to that race to the bottom dynamic that sometimes kicks in. And I've been reading about this idea of progress trap, and I wanted to get back to it maybe after first round of remarks. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. But Min, over to you. I think you really are operating in the kind of the most interesting frontier of this change that we don't yet feel, but it's clearly coming. Could you tell us more on genomics and its impact on humanity, on society?
Okay. So you said that what I'm doing is the most frontiers, but I think it's a really basic of what the people are really interested in. We are living in a society that the technology has changed so fast. We never had a time that technology advance is this fast, and it really affects everything in our life. However, the most people has more interested in what's happening outside, and all the technologies that with the internet and social networkings and everything, we'll try to connect the things in outside, and there is now technology that can really solve many problems that we are seeing outside. But yesterday I was in the talk with Jack Ma from the Alibaba. He's also talking about now it's time to be more decoding what's inside. So if you're thinking about what's inside, is basically it's me, it's you, because there are 7 billion people around in the world, and if you look at every single person here, no one is same as me. I mean, so what fundamentally makes this difference is actually written in your DNA. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm doing. So, all the technology development, it will, change the many different things, but eventually people are more interested in by themselves. They want to know more about themselves, and they really want to see what can we do with all differences. I really like these panels because we all have very different background, and at the same time, we're living in different countries, but fundamentally, many of these differences are written in your code. And the old technologies, it's impossible to decode every single person's DNA, but now we are living in a stage that's really feasible. So in the near future, pretty much almost every single person will understand better of their genomes that can really give. It's not only for certain disease, but it really gives a blueprint of yourself, and they can connect to many different technologies. So, I believe, we really have to look at what's inside, what we can really decode from, what we have is what I'm doing, and the technology is ready to get to the point.
Super. No, I love your tie and your pin with the DNA in there, and you mentioned Jack Ma, and one of the things he said in his presentation that the further we go in this journey of understanding the genome, knowing how we can tweak it with CRISPR and the rest of it, he mentioned this idea that maybe soon we'll be all boosting this longevity gene, and to me the question then, if it becomes possible, especially if it becomes possible for people who have the means, what kind of societal tension will that create? It's not the question of technology, it's a question of society. If we, emerging economies, sub-Saharan Africa versus the Nordics or the US, and who has the resources, are we going to have access to this technology in ways that are going to create more inequality? And to me that could be the most dangerous space where society, the fabric of society could start to tear. But we'll get back to that. But Max, maybe you can share, as somebody who looks at all kinds of things, right? A lot of things that were mentioned. You work with startups, you look at technology. What is changing our life right now?
Well, as someone who deals mostly with startups at an early stage, working with founders as an investor, as a mentor very often, I think the basic tenet of our times, the most important trend that is happening right now, which is kind of underlying all of the things that everybody here has mentioned, but on a very basic level, yet very fundamental, is that we live in an age of what I like to call informational ubiquity, right? And this is a very new thing that happened even, in my life. Think about it, right? Every one of us here in this room, doesn't matter whether you're younger or older, we all grew up with this idea told to us by our parents, by our teachers, that you have to study to get ahead in life, right? Those who have access to information will have more opportunities, right? All of us remember times when, in order to read a book that you wanted to read, or watch a movie that you wanted to watch, you would have to put effort into finding it, right? Today we live in a time, and this is a fundamental change over less than 10 years, in which basically any piece of information, any bit of information, audio, visual, textual, technical, ever known to man since the very beginning of human civilization, is basically in this 100 gram or 120 or 30 gram, whatever that thing weighs nowadays, little glass steel box, which is in your pocket, right? As society, we are fundamentally not yet ready to deal with that, right? All our informational systems, all our societal paradigms, our rituals even, are based around the idea that information is scarce and you have to find a trusted source that will teach you what to do with it. This is turning everything around, and this current chaos that we see with the media going completely haywire, our parents' generation, for instance, absolutely not being able to deal with the media frenzy and becoming extremist in their political views. People that used to be totally middle of the line, wonderful, classical in American language, suburban parents are suddenly becoming far left or far right. These are all results of this change, and it's actually very basic and at the same time extremely complicated. And I'm fascinated by it. I'm a little afraid of it, but I think if we manage to find at least one answer out of many for this problem, we'll succeed. But let's see. You found this thing that I think
a lot of writers, a lot of commentators are grappling with this the avalanche of information. How do we swim in it and without, getting lost? I wanted to take a couple of quick polls with the panel and the room as well. So, who in this room believes that at some point in the distant future, or not so distant future, a human being could live to, let's say, 200 years? Who thinks that's going to eventually happen? 200 years. I'm not saying tomorrow, but generally. Very few. I'd say 10% maybe. How about the panel? Who thinks it will become eventually possible to live 200 years for a given human? I just wanted a poll.
I'm going to side with Min since he's the genome expert and he didn't raise his hand, so I'm going to say no.
Min, you're skeptical. Tell me why.
I would say it's possible because there are several things going on right now. Now we are in the stage that people really start understanding what's the secret code of ourselves. Okay, so if you look at all the different animals and plants, they have different lifespans. Even some animals they live longer than human, and many animals they live shorter. But if you think about turtles, they can live up to 150 years or even longer. And there is something intrinsically programs to live every living creatures live with certain lifespans. And if we really look at the human, we think that it's like 70, 80 is our average lifespans. But if you really look at some of the centenarians and old people, they tend to live up to 100 years and 120 years. And most people that are known, there are some people they live over 120 years, but they didn't really have a good record to support. But we generally believe that the people can live up to 120 years if they can really manage their disease or health condition very well. If you really look at the lifespan right now, people normally say 70, 80s, but the majority of deaths is actually caused by the disease, and especially a lot of chronic disease that we are facing in later older lifespan, or the older stage like cancers, Alzheimer's, and cardiovascular disease. So the main, if you think about the aging, is really share the mechanism with the disease. With all the new technologies and the better health cares, and now people have a way to manage this disease better than any time before. So that's why the life gradually increasing to 80s, 90s, and we are really facing an era of like Homo 100, which people life expectancy reached to 100 years or longer. So that's probably easier steps to get to up to 120 years, because if you can manage your health disease, you could live up to 120 years, and the genomics play, especially the personal genomics, play a huge role to people can live up to 120 years, because our genes can actually not only tell us that what kind of disease mutation you have, but at the same time we can use this genomic information for what kind of disease we may develop in the later our lifetime, so that we can do a more preventive measure of our the health. However, the challenge lies after 120. So there is probably some kind of programmatic issues that can extend the life. However, we are really seeing a new technology such as gene editing and stem cell technologies. These are something that we try to go beyond the limits, and especially at least in the animal models, if they manipulate some genes, they can really extend their lifespans to 1.5 times. Right. And that has been well proven in some of the worms and some insect and some of the small animals, but because of some limitations with the human applications, there is no such trial that just changing one genes and then you could live up to 150 years. But still, that's possible with all the new technologies coming. And obviously, there are a lot of ethical issues, safety issues that we have to deal with. But I think that's why I think it's probably possible in the near future.
No, thank you for keeping us grounded, because my vote would be, I think, not yes because it's possible. It's yes because of what Margareta said, because of layering of things that have nothing to do with genomics. I think the quantum computing could have a bigger impact on genomics than current research, by miles. Who knows? It's just hard to predict. But I appreciate what you were saying, that a lot of us get excited about what we read in the news and this research on mice you mentioned, and they tweak some genes with CRISPR, the gene editing mechanism. There are some people that purchase gene editing kits and then get them shipped to their homes, and then they create whatever, the genome soup, and they inject themselves. So to me, this is also absolutely fascinating where this could take us. Another poll I wanted to take, and then to shift gears for a second, is on AI. Who in the room believes that one day, again, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, we will have sentient AI, we will have conscious AI? Not talking about general intelligence matching human intelligence. I mean AI that's self-aware, like the thing that you see in the movies. Do you think that will eventually happen? Raise your hand if you think that's gonna be the case. Again, not a big crowd, so I'd say 15, 20% maybe. On this panel, who thinks sentient, self-aware, conscious AI will eventually happen? No one. All right, I'm thrilled. So I think, again, from what I'm reading, I'm no scientist, but from what I'm reading, to me it seems inevitable. It seems like if we talk in indefinite time horizon, we must arrive with it. But you know a lot more about AI, so maybe I'll go to Jonathan.
It sort of means, define consciousness, right? I mean, so
Perfect question.
I mean, how does anybody know anybody else is conscious? So it's almost a. I think what you're going to see is that it'll be certainly you can already pass Turing tests, and so for all practical purposes, walks like a duck, talks like a duck, sounds like a duck, probably is a duck. So yeah, I mean, effectively you'll have AI able to carry on conversations, to have a meaningful customer service interaction, to be your doctor. Is it sentient? I don't know. But that's an interesting question. It sort of will get us to the point of saying, I think to the point earlier is like let's define norms. I mean, just because we think something is quote unquote sentient or not, does that mean we should treat it differently? So what about pets? I mean, are they sentient? Yeah, most people would say. So why not AI? Different kind of consciousness.
The more we talk about society, the more we get into philosophy, morality. I think those are the key questions. Margarita, you wanted to jump in on this, no?
Yes. So I think in terms of back to the point, just because we can do it, we shouldn't necessarily do it. And I think in terms of the rolling it out, what's going to be a major constraint is the speed of governments to be able to define those norms and to change the modus operandi as well to some extent. Because the way I see it right now, first of all, governments will be essential. It will be the main leaders probably who will have a key role in terms of identifying those norms, setting those norms. There are also other leaders who play a role from an ethical perspective. I completely agree. But I think governments are the ones who are right now the best placed. And there is, I think it's still a very, very long way to go until they are properly equipped, because even in the most advanced countries, they are not well equipped. So what the questions are in terms of catching up with the speed of those developments. And then, very often it boils down to ethical questions and to getting the society behind, an agreement behind some of those ethical questions, which just simply takes a lot of time and takes a lot of debate probably as well. So I don't see, I see that society will probably be a limit on the deployment of technologies for quite a while, just because we will not be able to put those norms and frameworks into place as quickly as we may think. So this is on the deployment of technology, on the speed of deployment. Also on the health side. I mean, on the health side, this debate has been going on for a very long time, right? And there has been ethical committees for health questions. But, having similar types of methods and similar types of approaches on some of the other technologies will take time. Maybe I would love to hear from Jonathan, because I think China has been much more advanced on those questions than some of the other Western countries.
Well, and I think Min would probably have some views here as well. But the history of technology, though, unfortunately, or otherwise, is that distributional effects have not been a reason to stop the deployments. That the only thing that tends to stop deployment of technology is if it's perceived to have an imminent risk to the entire society, in which case somebody steps in and says, well, we should really control this. Bioweapons being an example, nuclear being another one. So when the threat is so overwhelming that basically everybody can agree, then we tend to slow it down. Unfortunately, for pretty much anything else, we said, okay, let her rip, see what happens.
I think you're getting us to that progress trap discussion. First, quick reminder, guys, I've just checked our bot, and there are no questions from you. So if you have any questions, please type them in so we know what you're thinking about, and again, you get to be part of this conversation. So if you don't know how to use the bot, ask around. I think I wanted to go to Armando in a second, but this progress trap idea is it's apparently it's a Victorian notion that progress is a change towards better, and we kind of accepted it. Like we live with this idea that the direction of progress is towards betterment. And then the gentleman that I wanted to refer to, he argues that our first technology, the stone tools, then we got an arrow, and then we got gunpowder, but eventually we got all the way to nuclear weapons, which was not progress towards betterment. It got us into a progress trap in this particular field. And then the question is, can we be moving in that direction in all kinds of other fields? And AI, we talked about genome, we talk about ethics of it, but it's an interesting reframing if we stop thinking of progress as a process of betterment and advancement in a positive direction. Armand?
I've got a few points that I just want to bring out, and feel free to push back, because I might be completely wrong. What I'm seeing from within the classroom is that students are worried, right? Children are worried. What they're seeing in the news, their parents' conversations and everything, what used to be sort of a utopia of growing up thinking the world was a safe place, Santa Claus existed, so on and so forth. I apologize if anybody believed in Santa Claus, but it's gone. And a lot of them are now growing up with this belief that progress for all. If we're going to have progress, it needs to be sustainable for all people and needs to be good. And I'll give you an example. On this panel right here, if a student wanted to look at their genome in terms of their health or their family, I have an AI expert, I have a genome expert, probably have a blockchain expert, an entrepreneur, and a researcher. There's a student here that could easily design something to help their family. We had a student that designed an app for not facial recognition, but that would give her grandmother, an Alzheimer patient, every morning would put 5-6 pictures up and basically would say who they are so that it helped her remember as she's going through dementia, right? To me, if you're looking at the progress and we're thinking, is this progress going to help? It needs to help all. And I'm not just talking humans. We've had progress in all fields, but why the heck are we still having ivory trade? It's because we haven't addressed the root cause of the issue. We keep putting Band-Aids on things. And as we keep putting Band-Aids on things, and it happens in education tenfold, we keep not addressing the root cause, which keeps people not trusting, which keeps corruption high, which keeps on and on. So when I'm talking about leadership, I'm not just talking political leaders, I'm talking everybody, including leadership of yourself. You know, if you see something, it's your job to say it. And I'm not saying because you have a voice that you should use it. There's a lot of stuff that people say that has not based on fact. But what I am saying is that if we are going to progress, we need to progress for everyone. And that includes the animals, the earth, all sorts of things. And Ukraine is, I mean, we're here, we're talking at the International Economic Forum. You're able to leapfrog a lot of the things that are going on. In Canada, we have a big issue in our society at this point in terms of trying to pivot to renewable energy, but having oil galore in the West, right? And even though piping is quite the same for renewable energy, and it would be a quick pivot, we can't take a hold of the conversation for the greater good. And I hate using the term greater good because it's been used in negative connotations in the past, but to me, that's something that we need to think about. And as we connect all these sectors together, that should be a conversation and a bond between these sectors and these high, intelligent thinking people to make sure that it does go forward. At the end of the day, I won't be at that table. I'm not going to be in that room, right? I'll be in my classroom trying to do the best I can for our community. But it should be something that should be spoken, and that bond, if broken, you should call them out. And it should be said, and it should be talked about, and there should be repercussions to that.
No, thank you for that. I think we're getting to this question of us taking kind of control of where we're progressing. Is humanity able to do that at all? We clearly know we cannot uninvent things. Once they're invented, it's done. And it seems that we just cannot stop ourselves from advancing technologically, and that's where all those questions come up with, you know, how long are we supposed to live? If we invent that technology, if somebody knows how to tweak that gene and now we can live till 500, can we then choose not to use it? Those are absolutely fundamental questions. I wanted to go to the audience. Thank you guys for chipping in. So Kirill Pritula wants to ask the panel, how will we define a human in this Society 4.0. Will the robots have rights? That's not his question, but what's the definition? Max, since you are the lucky winner of that ticket.
Well, it's actually, this is a very, very funny thing because it goes back to something I wanted to say on the last question. I think that it is inevitable that technology develops, right? Attempts to stop that have, I don't think historically ever been successful, usually leading to a lot of human drama. I think that this is my belief as an eternal, diehard tech optimist. I think that our job to increase what is the human factor will you know, the standard will be raised, right? I think that the humans of the future, as technology progresses, we will need to take the human qualities that make us different from machines or animals and work on them. I think that we will live in a time, maybe not us, although we don't know how long we'll live, but imagine we live up to 120, 150. Maybe it's not us, maybe next generations. We will live in a time when a lot of the things that today are still done by humans, and I'm not talking about, you know, the automated work that we already see computers taking over, but I think a lot of the creative work that we do today might probably be done by machines, computers, robots in the future. However, our job is to always be ahead of that curve. And if you look at the history of mankind, art has always played that role, right? Art has always played the role of asking questions that nobody else wants to ask. That's my favorite definition of art. Always being on the forefront of asking, using human creativity to ask the fundamental questions about life. And I think that as humans, if we're to survive, this is actually, I think, an evolutionary challenge to us. If we are to survive, we have to take art and creativity to continuously new levels as technology progresses, right? And as long as we can do that, there will be always a very clear difference between what is human, what is machine. It will be inevitably very different than it is today, hundreds of years from now, but I do think that a lot of, almost everything that we see today will probably be machine at some point, but human will hopefully, if we survive, be something totally different. That's my abstract, if optimistic still view.
I love it. I think it's a great way to put it. It feels like maybe a derivative of what you said. We might have to define ourselves in opposition to technology. We will have to say technology is that, and we're different in this way, which used to not have to be the case. We knew we were humans who were special, but now we have to keep reflecting. And Vasily Khmelnytsky yesterday, when he was speaking, he mentioned that computers are now writing text. You know, they composing music. So I'm not saying they've taken over the art domain, because the way you defined it, it's not, you know, it's not about, you know, putting notes on a sheet of paper. But no, this is great. I wanted to now go to the room, and then I wanted to see how many questions we have. Raise your hand if you have a question. If there are a few questions, then we'll do that. Okay, so we'll go to you. I think you speak a couple of words.
Okay. Hi, dear audience. Hi, dear panel.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Svetlana Musienko. I'm a lawyer. Very, very, you know, humanic. Probably my profession will disappear in a number of, I don't know, years, but my question is not about that. Dear panel, what's your take on space travel? Do you think this is something that we, as humanity, are going to succeed eventually? And is it for the greater good? Thank you.
Great. Could I add space colonization on top of space travel? Are we supposed to live on other spaces beyond Earth? What are the thoughts? Or maybe do a poll, quick poll. Who thinks space travel and space colonization is in the cards? It will happen. Okay, colonization. Are we going to live on Mars? Maybe even simpler. Are we going to have humans permanently staged there? Like, is that going to happen?
In our lifetime? No.
Okay.
No.
Who's got reflections on that question? You know, who wants to comment on space?
I can say a couple of things. I just happen to be very biased. My dad is a space scientist, so I grew up around this whole topic. My dad participated in the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, the SETI project. There are two kinds of space travel. There is, it's called suborbital, so you can basically go from a point on Earth to another point on Earth at a speed that is lower than required to go into orbit, but still go through space. I think that's kind of, I mean, that technology already exists. It's Virgin Galactic, Xcore, other companies. I think we'll see that will become affordable very soon, in our lifetime for sure, in the next decades. So we can go from, let's say, Kyiv to San Francisco in an hour or 2 hours. We'll be able to do that in a few decades. It'll be very expensive still. It'll be like business class, but you can still do it. I think that living in space, colonization of Mars, my personal thought on it is we could do it technically. Hopefully we'll never have to, because if it will happen, it means that we screwed up Earth, right? But if we really kill Earth, I do think that a very small select group of survivors will go somewhere else and live there. One of the things, and this is the last thing I'll say, something that my dad taught me when I was growing up is that civilization, very intelligent civilizations, not only probably exist, they for sure exist somewhere in the universe. And many of them are less advanced than we are. Many of them are much more advanced than we are. And it's 100% sure that they exist. However, the chance of us ever getting in touch with them in any way is tiny. And my dad has always said that, like, we have to hope with all our hope and pray to any God that we believe in that it never happens. Because if it does happen, we probably won't survive it and it won't be nice. So... that's how I think about it.
I wanted to give you a counter argument. I'll step aside from my moderator role, but there is this book by Max Tegmark, MIT physicist, and one of the early arguments he makes, he says, we're destined to disappear. Humanity, all of us, is destined to disappear because Earth will run into the sun eventually. And if we don't become this spacefaring species, there is an end to this whole thing. And I thought this is an interesting, it's really cosmic thinking. We're not talking decades or even centuries. But it's an interesting way to consider, future society. But there was a question in the very back. Are you still there with us? Yeah.
Thank you for this great panel. My name is Taras Byk. I'm a consultant. I would say we have this kind of visionary discussion, and since we have this Harari-style panel, I have the following question. In one of his chapters, Harari comes to quite depressing conclusion that there is no sense in human life, there is no sense in living. So if suddenly humanity disappears, the universe will not mention this. In your opinion, future society, will it have different response to this question? The sense of human living. Do you have a response to this question? Thanks.
Oh, I wanted to actually take a poll. Who is with like this reference to Harari and like, are we doomed or are we going to be a spectacular success? Like with technology, AI, genome, the rest of it. Who thinks that things will eventually really go terribly wrong and we're doomed and things will get really bad? Okay, who thinks things will become really amazing? We'll merge with the machines. We'll, Okay, what the rest of you guys? You have to choose one or the other.
I'll tell you what, Andrew. I think I know why the rest of the people aren't voting. I've got young kids. I got a 5-year-old turning 5 tomorrow, a 3.5-year-old, and a 9-month-old. And I don't want to imagine the worst for them. And I think when we're talking about the enormity of change, people don't necessarily want to face what's happening in many ways. I'm one of them, and that's why I didn't vote it. I don't want to raise my hand and say, you know what, it's going to be the worst. But to be the best, if we're talking about progress, let's take Uber, okay? So Uber, digital platform, shared economy. Great. It also disrupted numerous communities across the world, communities that taxi drivers had jobs, unioned, and broke the union, broke a lot of those drivers' possibilities to make ends meet, and then doesn't get taxed properly to help pivot those drivers into different jobs. So that's where I'm talking about leadership, and that's where I'm talking about governance and the transparency of governance to make sure that there isn't corruption, but that we are leading and we are actually ahead of the curve and helping society make those pivots so that the divide doesn't get bigger. And we're already seeing that divide and the rise of the pushbackism, right, across the U.S., the elections in 2016. That's exactly what it was, and numerous other areas. So to me, the not voting, I think, is because we're hoping for the best, but we're also fearing the worst because we're not seeing that leadership right now.
I think, just back to this question of it's going to be fantastic or really bad. I think it's neither nor, right? This is what history tells us. It's neither very great nor it's really bad. We're muddling through the middle somehow all the time. And some things get better, others get worse. And we just hope that we can prevent the worst that we have done so far, right? We also know that things like biological weapons, as you mentioned earlier, there were certain real threats to humanity which we did manage to prevent. Sometimes after a catastrophe, World War I as well. But overall, I think I'm mildly optimistic, and it's not going to be fantastic. The world will continue as it is with strengths and weaknesses, but we will have a more positive than negative effects on average from technology.
Well, that's great to hear. One question then to consider is, again, we're moving into this fantastic future, and then we're constrained in many respects by economic thinking. It's an economic forum, and our economic thinking is constrained by capitalistic thinking. And I learned this new term, stakeholder capitalism. It feels like a lot of this societal tension comes from this inequality, from inability to act, and much of it is grounded in our economic system per se. And then, Margareta, you worked on the ideas to redefine, what do we measure? Why do we measure the GDP thing? And then because it drives all kinds of decisions on the political level. And it feels like, to me, it's an interesting conversation. It deserves its own panel. But this capitalism 2.0, 5.0, or whatever we call it, can we reinvent how our society is organized in terms of economic relation, and will it allow us to then deal with all this difficulties that we're describing. And maybe I wanted to go to you, Margareta, and then Jonathan.
Yeah, I think we invented GDP at some point, right? It was the result of a certain thinking. So I think we need to, the metrics issue is really important. I think the metrics, the main metrics that we use and how it trickles through the economy and how it drives decisions, and even at the micro level, it's, the metrics are very pivotal, but we're really far away from having a better metric than GDP right now. So changing statistical systems takes ages, and changing the way we measure takes a very long time. Actually, technology may be a very good solution, but we are still far away from having better metrics. I think one other element is where I see change happening towards a different type of economic approaches is to some extent with what's happening in Europe and in many of the Scandinavian countries in the challenge-based innovation approaches, where innovation is really channeled towards societal challenges. So it's a way of channeling economic activity to address some of the main societal challenges, such as aging. It could be health issues. It could be environmental challenges as well, income inequality, promoting social innovation as well. So there are certain approaches that are ongoing, but it doesn't. It still is around centered around the current capitalistic model fundamentally as well. But within this system, there are. Definitely the Scandinavian countries are really interesting to look at in terms of how they approach innovation and their overall economic policy and how they link it to society as well.
No, I think it's a great insight that we're not really reinventing capitalism, we're trying different things. But Jonathan, what do you think the question is properly introduced, saying that there is this tension between our society advancing in a way that we wish, in a way that Armin described, and the capitalistic economic system? Do you think it exists, or do we need this redefinition? Is it possible?
Well, okay. I mean, there are a couple of things I wanted to respond to, starting with what's a human, but we'll put that on the side for a while because I think it's a fascinating question. Well, first of all, I think Harari is an idiot. So can we get that out of the way? I mean, I just think that this, doom-mongering sort of Silicon Valley sort of centered view of the world is kind of silly. I mean, it's not only silly, I think it's actively counterproductive when it comes to the spirit of trust and optimism and confidence that the Prime Minister referred to this morning. So if you wake up in the morning and think the world's going to end tomorrow, why would you do anything? So, I mean, I actually feel it's actively harmful to the debate of a healthy, popular discourse. And I would put, health warnings around his books as to say, read this at your own cost, because and be careful whether you educate your children by looking at this, because it's genuinely fake news. Okay, so I said that. Now moving to capitalism, capitalism is a relatively recent construct, and it was built off of the idea of markets that would allocate scarce resources. And nowadays, look around. So what's the scarce resource? We have negative interest rates. It seems like capital is pretty available. We have the most educated bunch of people in the planet everywhere, and they're more mobile than they've ever been before. Technology is global. It flows from China to the U.S., to Israel, to wherever. So why, capitalism? I mean, or what capitalism? And I think the answer is, I don't know yet. I think we'll figure that out. That's going to be, the market will evolve, and the form of companies that we have will change. And I don't even know if we'll have companies. I think we'll just have a lot of projects, and people will come together, except in places where that doesn't make sense, like running, I don't know, a local healthcare system, perhaps. But so capitalism will evolve. That doesn't take the responsibility away from us, because we are all individually capitalists, we're all individually taxpayers, we're all individually voters, we're all individually employers and employed. We get to decide what we want capitalism to do. And if we want to decide that it should do something differently, well, great, then we should change our labor arrangements. We should change our our governance structure, our transparency, our method of allocating capital, all that we can decide. And how do we do that? Well, we do that through some way of demonstrating our governance. So we vote for people, or we demonstrate in the street, or whatever we do, but we all do that. And I've just never found, I mean, I'll just be practically, I don't believe that capitalists, in the sense of companies, are going to, quote unquote, save the world. I mean, they are going to go out and do what they do, which is to play the rules of the game, and they like to win, and that's the point. That might have some benefits. I think that would, very well, but it will be because the rules of the game are set so that those benefits are what people are competing to deliver, whether it's customer services or products or improving the quality of life for people. And I'll close with one example of housing. So most people will build housing for, if you let the market decide, what will it do? Well, it will go build housing for rich people, basically, because it's easier to do that, and that that there's a market there. If you tell them you have to build housing for poor people, they're going to say, well, why would I do that? Because I'm not sure that I'll get the returns. The project won't pencil. But then if you say, no, here's the game. The game is you can build housing for rich people, but you also have to build housing for poor people, and it has to be in the same building. Then you will start to see people compete on how much housing can they build for poor people. And they will maximize the share that they can build, because then they'll get the project. Then they'll win. That's the rules of the game. So change the rules, change the game.
No, I appreciate that. I think it's always good to stay grounded. Or else we go into the futurism that's not real. So another question here. Introduce yourself and. You start speaking and.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, my name is Sasha. I'm a technology startup founder, and with all these new ways of living our lives. When we think about our past, we didn't have much time to learn ourselves. We were striving for food. We were striving for shelter. Right now, we have so much time to actually learn about ourselves that people sometimes, I don't know, it's kind of corner cases, but they start questioning themselves a lot, right? Am I he? Am I she? Am I theirs? Like this is like people that sometimes, like from my perspective of a person being a Ukrainian citizen, I'm maybe not that much tolerant to all these questions. Like a person that is not sure is he or she, is he, like they call themselves they ask others to call them they, because they are not defined in their status. So how do you think, this is also one of this part of people evolvement, is this something that is very questionable from the perspective of like we have too much time to think different about ourselves, or is it a good trajectory? And are there any such topics that would arise to people around the world in the same direction that
thank you.
were not imaginable sometime before?
Thank you for your question. Any takers?
I'm Canadian. My brother is a homosexual, and I believe in rights. And if they want to be called they, they'll be called they. If they want to be called he, he'll be called he. If he wants to be called she, that's what she'll be called. But I'm tolerant of what their beliefs are. Same as I'm tolerant of religion, same as I'm empathetic to everyone. And if I'm not, then I'm not collaborating with everybody. So at the end of the day, I believe in rights and rights of all. And that means everybody and what they believe in. Now, that being said, in terms of time, I actually don't think we have more time. I think we have less. Because of technology as we're moving forward, if you're looking at our students, mindfulness is a very important issue. Mental health is a very important issue. They are constantly on technology. They're struggling with sleeping. Anxiety is on a rise. Panicking is on a rise. You have two parents working jobs. You have parents working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet to be middle class. So when you're talking about we have more time to think, I don't see it. I don't think it's happening. I actually think that it's part of what we need to start to look at in terms of leadership is how do we create technology, but at the same time give the tools to the people to be able to have strong mental health, have strong family values. Have strong, and family values means you accept the people that are around you for what they are. And to me, I'm pushing back on that one quite hard as a Canadian.
Fair point. For me, it's an interesting question. As technology advances, the progress, quote unquote, is it pushing us towards one humanity? It's another question we have not touched on. The nation state, does it have a staying power indefinitely, or the trends are such that we need to collaborate globally, and we might end up with global institutions, even though today there's plenty of resentment towards even the term globalism went from positive to negative, and in that world that's more inclusive, it's probably more tolerant. But maybe anyone on the panel who wants to chime in on this idea that the future society has to do with kind of, nation states in terms of their power, go into the way the cities are or whatever, and there's a global coordination that's not UN kind of voluntary, but real, serious institutions that have power. Any thoughts on this idea?
Well, I may not have an answer, but definitely there is a trend that we see that a few things, a few observations more than anything. So we see that the power is shifting away from the nation states because the number of questions that are transnational seems to be growing, right? That concern nations, a number of nations at the same time, and especially with technological developments, they don't know any frontiers, so this is likely to speed up. We also see that, at the city level, there is a huge concentration on power that's going on, and that the economic power or economic geography is also distributing differently, which is more strongly distributed around cities rather than around nation states. At the same time, politics seem to be going in the opposite direction, so it's hard to imagine that this is going to happen anytime soon, that we will get towards a multinational type of institution that has real power anytime soon, probably not in our lifetime. And, we should not forget that, unfortunately, even the current structures, they emerged after a major crisis, so after a major world war. Not sure this is something we should wish for at this point in time. I think it takes, I think that the national element is still very, very strong, and this national sentiment among people as an identification does not seem to be becoming less strong.
No, I think your point on crisis, like without crisis, we don't make serious change. So for us to wish for serious change, we automatically have to assume the crisis will emerge. Climate is one of them, but it could be other things that will push us to coordinate, right? But, John?
I mean, I'm trying to be short. So first of all, don't count out the nation state thing. It's still kind of the bulk of what we've got going in terms of governance and resource mobilization and how we decide to manage our trade or our intellectual property and so forth. So, but that said, I don't think we lose anything, exactly as Margaret said. We're starting to gain more. We're starting to gain more structures in the form of global, multilateral collaborations, of global structures themselves that are sort of transnational in nature, and in terms of individual capacities. And I think bio really, puts a lot of this into very sharp perspective because, again, bio risk is different from nuclear risk. In bio risk, it's really cheap, it's viral, it can spread really quickly, and it's autonomous. It can decide what it wants to do. And so this creates a very different framework for managing risk, where as opposed to you could lock something up in a, in a military state and sort of say it was under control. I'm not sure you can do that with bio. So this sort of starts to create a much more, transnational need for risk framework. That's one point. Second point is that the nation states, of course, that we have today, all of the structures we had were based off of the post-Bretton Woods environment, and that's no longer relevant. Simply put, that Asia is the center. Asia is the biggest, going to be the biggest economies. It's going to be the biggest sets of technology investors, the biggest markets. So they want their own nation-state, transnational, multinational arrangements, and we're seeing that. And we're seeing, a restructuring of all of them, whether in the financial institutions, the intellectual property, the trade organizations, and, ultimately the representative institutions of governance. So all of those multilateral institutions that were set up in the time where communications was done by ship, they're all going to go. And they're all going to be fundamentally restructured, so we won't even recognize them. That's important. And finally, cities. I'm a cities person, so now, you see the rise of these urban kind of, agglomerations, the Global League of Cities, the C40, the Resilience 100 as it used to be, and that's all great. I wouldn't count on that necessarily leading to anything more peaceful. I think that the history of city-states has been very volatile. You go back, they easily declare war on each other for for whatever purposes. So, I think that therefore, introducing all of these new forms of governance, of actors, going to create a lot more volatility, and so it'll be exciting space.
Yeah, if I can just add just a little bit to this, and I know probably Andrew wants me to speak out because he knows very well that I'm someone who's a very big problem saying where I'm from or finding one national identity, because I really have many by nationality, by countries of origin, et cetera, I do think that the reason countries, on a very cultural level, the reason that countries are still as important as they are, primarily is because most people still identify with one culture, or at least one culture more than any other, right? And that's, I think, why we still have the governance systems, the economic systems that are in place. Those things are very quickly changeable, I think, once a majority, or at least a sizable minority of people will be like, well, I'm at least from two different places. And I think that change is happening now. We're still not noticing it, but when I look at my friends, even those that aren't like me, that haven't lived all over the world or in different countries their whole life, their kids are very often mixed marriage culturally, right? So even many of my friends that have grown up in one place, literally just from one country, they found someone in life that isn't from that country, and their kids already have 2 passports and speak 2 or 3 languages at home, right? And the amount of people to whom that is happening right now is growing so fast that I think that, this room 20, 30 years from now, or 40 if it's 2 generations, will be full of people who are like, yeah, it probably will become one of those things that, just like with the question of gender identity and sexual identity that someone asked a question about, it'll be the same thing. It will be considered a very rude and politically incorrect question to say where you're from. Like, what do you even mean? Am I supposed to assume a country identity? Like, that's really very rude of you, right? And I think we'll get to that point in the next decades, and it will change our perception, and it probably will impact the way we see states and the power they have in our lives.
This is, exactly what I wanted to hear. But I'm optimistic about what you're saying. You're saying it could be a natural progression towards this. In a way, there are natural forces that would not require crisis. But the other scenario from Margareta is saying the global issues that require coordination will become so complex or so dreadful or so damaging that we will come together out of necessity, the same way UN was set up as a consequence of World War II, right? So it's good to see that there is also a positive angle. I wanted to go to the room. I think we could stick with that topic, but if there are more questions in the room. A gentleman in the back? Oh, I wonder if we have headsets. You will ask in Ukrainian, Russian? Okay. We give him a sec.
So, do you hear the interpretation? So, dear ladies and gentlemen, Renenko Anatoly from the Economic University, a professor. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that I don't speak English. Some German, some French know English, unfortunately. So, in the global world, on our planet, on a daily, every second, 3 babies are born. So you may understand how many have been born over this panel. About 9,000 per hour. 6.5 people are dying within a second. And over a year, on the planet of Earth, their population increases by 33 million. it is added to almost 200 states, one country, like of the size of Poland. Well, I can continue a lot with those statistics, but the point is that probably the Earth has some limits in terms of its environment and ecology, and if it keeps on going in that way, so what would be the opportunities for those technologies in regulating demographics, the population, and the issues related to employment of the people who have been born? Thank you. Thank you.
I think, yeah, that's the #1 question. You know, can our ecological system, can the Earth survive advancement of humanity?
With all the changes that we are seeing.
Anyone wants to pick it up? Is our ecological system prepared to deal with us, our exponential advancement? Are we? The gentleman is asking about work, about probably climate as well. Just simply more people, more technology, more progress. Can this planet tolerate it?
Let me get into the fact that we studied that we never seen the change and the technology advance like this before. However, we really have to see ourselves. Okay, we all sitting in here, and in the beginning, but the instruction and all the hidden code is actually in our DNA. If you really look at your DNA itself, all the human genome projects that people have done was a big surprise, because we think that we have many genes, and all our genes are better than any animals or the plant out there. However, despite of all this, the genetic studies, people still wondered, we have only less than 2% of our genomes are actually functioning. That means they actually make proteins and do involve 98% of our genomes. Some people call it as a dark matters, but we don't know what it means. But if you really look at what it has to be on millions of years of evolutions, we've been facing a change that people may not survive now. I mean, there was an ice age, there was all this age, but we as a human survived up to this point. And even we think that we are smart and people are getting better and knowledges and everything, but scientists and say that we only use like less than 5% of our brains. So we as a human has a really huge potential to be adapt any changes. So we all know that we are facing a real change in the next 10, 20, or 100 years. At the same time, what's happening now is we as a species are creating all the diversities. Think about 100 years ago, I was born in South Korea, I live in US. All of a sudden, I'm in the panel discussion in Ukraine. And like you mentioned about that people are talking about, before we only have 2 genders, man and woman. Now we may have what the people think and people to learn. So the AI is not simply a machine that can do by themselves, but we will come up with a way that we can really use AI with all the changes that we are facing to work better for the human beings. And I believe that's what's in your DNA, and you have to be really proud that you are really survived up to this point. And I believe you will be survived in the next 100 years, 1,000 years.
I love your optimism. I think this is good. But on the pressure humanity is putting on this planet, I think, Margarita, you wanted to come in on what are we doing?
I think I wanted to bring it back to the more shorter term. And so first of all, I think we still have a long way to go in terms of being more efficient in terms of use of resources. There's still a lot that can be done as well. And, so yes, there is the big question whether everybody in the world can have the same standard of living as the Western countries, the wealthiest countries in the world, which is a very valid question, given the current pressure on resources that we are experiencing. So I think this is the more important question, this one, rather about the standard of living of the current population, rather the one about the absolute number of people. In terms of the fertility rates, we know what they are dependent on. We know actually quite well that this is directly linked to the status of education of women and of mothers, right? The higher education mothers receive, the less children they have, and also limited, directly linked to the survival of those children as well. So this is something that probably is going to, it's been changing globally quite quickly. The fertility rates have been going down. Most of the countries right now have actually the opposite problem, that they are aging very quickly and they don't have enough young people. But generally I see the question of how do we distribute wealth globally and who gets, can we really maintain the same levels of consumption that we have in Western countries across the entire world? And is this something that we can strive to with the current systems? This is probably the more relevant question right now than the absolute numbers of people on Earth.
Can I add to that, Andrew, as well?
Let's keep it super short because I wanted to take more questions. We are quickly running out of time. So keep it short.
And I agree with Margareta where she says that a lot of the countries are actually struggling. And I'm from a province in Canada where our age has flipped. So we actually have more elderly people than we have people being born. So it brings the next question on is how do you do immigration and how do you make sure that they immigrate and are feeling part of society and are joining that society to be productive? And another question that I had based off that is at the end, who decides, right? Who makes that decision on who has a sustainable living and who doesn't? And why does somebody get the right to decide?
Yep, I wanted to make an optimistic comment on picking up on Min's. I just learned this, I thought it was a very profound point, that all energy on this planet is solar. Some of it had to do with photosynthesis, plants, and then decay and so on become oil and we use it. But it really is, all of it is solar. So when we think of technological advancement, exponential technological advancement, it seems that there is a window for that. I'm not saying I don't know, we can get there. I'm not saying the technology will evolve. But in theory, if that's where energy comes from, if we solve that problem, who knows what else we could do. But I'm a tech optimist as well. So maybe I'll take two more questions. There one there. Anybody else has a question? Okay, we'll go to the gentleman then. Introduce yourself and keep it short.
Thank you very much for such interesting discussion. My name is Oleg Shvedanenko. I'm a teacher. That is why I decided to ask a question in this area. We're interested in your opinion. Where will exponential technology will lead humanity in educational area? Threats and opportunities.
Anyone?
In education, I think the major part is how do we grasp everything that's at your doorstep as a teacher. So as a teacher, it used to be curriculum content and that giving of knowledge. And certain skills were required to be able to analyze that knowledge and so on, and to do something with it. Now we're looking at competencies, social emotional skills, and knowledge, which means a retraining of the workforce in many ways. You're now just not a teacher, you're also a social worker, you're a psychologist, you're a nurse, you're a engineer, you're all these things. And the reality is you can't be. Now, I agree that the knowledge is all in here, but even more important is the actual room that you have access to. So to give you an example, on this panel, I now have international experts in different fields that if I have a student that's interested in something and I can personalize that curriculum outcome for them, I might be able to connect them with the right experts. So my job pivots to a stage on the stage, or a sage on the stage, to a facilitator and a coach. but I don't believe it's deprofessionalizing the teaching profession. I actually think it's upping the ante, because now you need to pivot constantly. You need to be able to think on your feet. And a bit like Min was saying, it's, you got ADHD, you're good to go because you're always pivoting, right? So I think that's part of the threat, but also part of the potential in education. I think the biggest threat is privatization of education, and I'll tell you why. Privatization of education, I believe, does not do the public good. I think strong public education systems are important for society. I think it's important that society have all the potential, and the moment you privatize it, it means that there's a certain potential of the society that goes away. It doesn't connect with that part. It creates divide. It also creates haves and have-nots. So I think that's an issue. I think the deprofessionalization of teaching in many areas where it's now become an occupation, check the boxes and make sure that you've done this, very a managerial mindset and not a humane mindset, which teaching is art and science. It's both. So we've tried to do the top-down managerial approach that works in business, but doesn't work in this setting necessarily, because you can't scale what works in one area into another, because it doesn't take into account the strengths and weaknesses of the teacher, of that culture, of that governance, of the social programs in place. So if it doesn't, what works in Singapore might not work in Canada, might not work in Ukraine. But I can take what works in Singapore, figure out how that works in my system based off all those things. But I think that is a threat, because at the end of the day, everybody says that they want to change the education system and be the person that does it, but it oftentimes goes against some of the values of society. And I'll just use one example quickly. The US, standardized testing is an overall massive pressure of the system in the US. That is a root cause of many issues. But instead of treating that root cause, they keep putting Band-Aids on it, right? And you're seeing the devaluing of education in many ways in that situation. So there's many other threats and potentials, but that's the short answer of it.
No, I appreciate that. I think since we're really short on time, I wanted to maybe summarize and end with quick advice from everybody. So let me say a few words of what I've learned at this panel. One thing it's absolutely clear is that we have so many more questions than we have answers. and the future of society has to do with defining what it is to be human. It has to do with ethics, it has to do with philosophy. It doesn't have less to do with technology. It seems like technological progress we can almost take for granted. But then what do we do with that progress is that dilemma, and that's where it's in a way up to all of us. There's one acronym that I really love that defines the present and the future. It's the VUCA. Anyone has heard of VUCA? It's the volatility, complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. We just have to live with it. It just seems to be the nature of things today. And yeah, you know, to end, what I wanted to ask every panelist, again, 1 second comment, is what advice you have. And then Vasily Khmelnytsky, when he was speaking yesterday, he said that what's necessary is knowledge, ideas. It's not the money, it's not help, it's ideas and knowledge. So I wanted to suggest that we recommend a book or something to read, something to do to make sure that future society that we're discussing, the Society 4.0, is a better one than what we've had in the past. The one book I'll start, and you guys think of what you want to recommend, but again, just one advice, okay? And so what I would suggest, the most optimistic book about the future that I've read is by Max Tegmark. I mentioned it earlier, called Life 3.0. It takes a really new look at what AI is and why it's not terrible. And he even explores the idea of meaning of life from the point of science. Amazing. So that's my advice. Who wants to go next?
Nothing? Well, I thought I'd be last. My advice is, and I've thought about it many times, and I keep saying this, I've even given talks on conferences about this. I strongly advise people not to read business nonfiction books. This is a little cocky, but I think that a lot of those theories are kind of overdrawn and overhyped, and they definitely don't last very long. I do think that it's very important to read fiction. And that's why I've been asked this question many times. I've been very often in really stupid situations where I say this and people go, no, but which business books? But I would really recommend fiction, art, classics, watch old movies, listen to music. This is what makes us human.
I second it. To stay human, do what Max says.
This is what makes us human.
Go next, but keep it short.
Okay.
One advice.
So, if the people are really resist for the change, the future is doomed and disaster. If you are willing to take these changes and adapt all these diversities, your future is going to be prosperous and glory.
Love it.
It's in your gene.
Yep, the genes let you do this, so embrace change. Armand?
I see a pop culture shirt from Min that says, dig your DNA. To me, it's build bridges, find the common humanity between people for progress for all.
Love it. Yeah, common humanity.
Do something uncomfortable every day. If you're not doing something uncomfortable, you're too comfortable. And that's kind of the road to stagnation and complacency and ultimately to the death of the species. So do something uncomfortable.
It's amazing, or else the VUCA will crush you. Great.
And, over all this discussion about the future society, don't forget the challenges of today, because we should not forget that we still have many people living in poverty and dying because we were not able to roll out things that exist already today. So I think we should not forget that one.
Thank you, Margareta. This is amazing. Please, a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, everyone, for making it here, for staying with us.